Okay, we'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming and taking your precious time off this morning. I'd like to introduce my guest to start with. This is Aaron Chadbourne. He holds 3 degrees from Harvard. Most of us would give a left thumb to get one. So Aaron's a Harvard undergrad. He studied government at Harvard. Then he got a degree in law from Harvard Law School. And then he's also an MBA from Harvard Business School. He's very active in the Harvard community. He actively mentors freshmen, so any of you looking to apply, I'd strongly advise you to talk to him and get a perspective. He's very actively engaged with the Harvard community globally. Aaron's now going to join McKinsey in Washington, D.C., starting in January. Aaron and I were actually classmates at business school, and we co-wrote a case at Harvard, and that's being taught now at the negotiations department at Harvard. Unfortunately, I'm not the coolest classmate Aaron's had. He was in school with Mark Zuckerberg. So he's going to share some anecdotes about Mark as well through his talk. So I'll start with the first question, Aaron. Tell us how it all began. Tell us about your journey, your childhood. How did Harvard even come about?
First of all, I just wanted to thank Vibha for the invitation to be here. I consider it a real honor to have the opportunity to speak with you about some of my experiences. It's my first visit to India, and so it's been a very great experience to see the country and to have such a wonderful tour guide and host, but also to have an opportunity to speak with you. So I'm going to try to be a little bit informal. I should also say that anything I talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences. Doesn't represent the views of Harvard. I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm happy to give you my experiences and my thoughts as an alumnus, but it's just my personal opinion and thoughts. It's funny because I don't know that I ever would have thought when I was growing up back home in the U.S. that I'd be talking about Harvard, and I just consider myself very blessed to have had the opportunity to go. I grew up in a small town in Maine, which is a state a little bit north of Boston, about a 6-hour drive from New York, a 2-hour drive from Boston. There are about 2 million people in the state of Maine, and in my hometown, there were growing up, I think, about 12,000 people. So you can imagine coming here to Bombay, it's a little bit bigger than that, I think. But no one from my high school had ever gone to Harvard before. There had been people who had gone to other schools, to Yale and to Dartmouth and to other great top schools, but no one ever to Harvard. And it had been a school that I read a lot about. And I know here, you hear the name Harvard, it's in the press, you read books, you see a lot of the great research, and you see people winning Nobel Prize from Harvard. And it seemed unattainable to me. And I think that I was always someone growing up that was willing to take a risk and being willing to apply. So when I set my sights on Harvard, I said, you know what, I might as well give it a shot. In high school, I think I did a lot of things that put me in a position to have the opportunity to be admitted. I was very active, academically. I never saw getting a high GPA as a goal in and of itself, and I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I know we're all very numbers-driven people and success-driven people, but I think I focused on being successful in each thing that I did. So every class that I took, I wanted to do the best that I could do in that class. And I think that attitude served me very well and allowed me to excel academically. And in the classes that I would enjoy, particularly, I would get to know my teachers. I would look for opportunities outside of class to get involved, and I'd try to relate them to my activities outside of class. And then I was always interested in student government, so I ran for office starting when I was in 3rd grade. And I got very active working with teachers and principals to change the school. It's something I became passionate about, and something that I continued to do when I was in college, working very closely with the president of Harvard at the time, Larry Summers, as well as the dean of Harvard College, people I got to know very well. And so it's things that I continued, but also when I've been in graduate school, its passions began early. I also was a Boy Scout. I don't know if they have Boy Scouts in India, but I was a Boy Scout. And I became an Eagle Scout, and I did an Eagle Scout project where I created a charity helping disadvantaged teenagers and collecting gifts for them at Christmas time. I was very active in my church, and I took on leadership roles there. And I think that one of the things that I've heard a lot that admissions officers look for is it doesn't necessarily matter which activities you're interested in. So for me, I was interested in student government and community service. I was interested in theater. I did a lot of singing and acting and plays, which is why I'm okay to speak in front of a group when Vibha springs it on me. But it doesn't matter which activities you get involved in. It's that you show that you're passionate about it. You show that you've taken your interest to the next level, and you have depth in your interest in what you've done. And so at that point, I just applied, and I spent a lot of time working on my essay to make sure my essay was reflective of me. Vib and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. We were talking about, what makes an essay stand out? What is something that makes it stand out? And I think a lot of us think about the technical perfection, that there have to be no spelling errors and that each sentence has to be grammatically accurate and it has to be done perfectly. And those types of things are important, right? You want to put your best face forward. You don't want it to be riddled with mistakes. But for me, my essay was more about showing someone something about myself, who I was as a person, what distinguished me. And so I wrote a lot about my childhood, about my grandmother that I grew up with. I grew up, again, in a small state, in a small town, and she had a vegetable stand on the side of the road, and that was my first experience with business. It's something that gave me an understanding of how business is more than just making money. It's actually interacting with people. It's about being part of a society. It's a way that you actually change the world. And I learned that from my grandmother on the side of the road selling corn, right? And that's what I wrote about. And it was just a very sincere essay that showed a little bit of who I am, about where I come from, and about kind of what my thoughts are about the world. And I think I've spent some time reading my advisees. So for the last 4 years, I lived with college freshmen as a residential advisor while I was a graduate student. And I got to read their essays and their applications from when they applied. And I think that's what stands out about some of the best essays you see, is that they really reveal something about the writer, and you get to understand how they think, how they see the world, and how they see themselves within the world, which shows a level of maturity that I think is refreshing. Like, the older that I get, the more impressed I am by the younger generations. And when you see students that stand out because of their maturity, that's something that I find very impressive.
So it was Harvard for undergraduate, and then did you ever consider leaving and exploring another campus or another city? Like, why did you just stay on at Harvard? What was it that sort of kept you going at Harvard?
It's funny. I did consider it. I think I loved Harvard. I think I've always felt very fortunate to have access to the resources and the opportunities that school has. And I think I looked at other schools as well. But it's funny, the law school and the business school and the college might as well be on different planets. They're very different schools from each other. They each have a different faculty. They each have a different type of student that they select for. They each have a different alumni base. And they take somewhat different approaches to their teaching, to their curriculum. They share a common university and they share a connection, which is great. So going to Harvard for college, you have access to these great graduate schools around you. But they're also very separate. And from being there when we were at business school together, the different schools are very separate and run differently. So I definitely looked at other schools. It just happened that the best schools in the world happen to be all at Harvard. But I think I did. I applied to a number of other schools for law school.
Oh, you did?
I was looking more broadly for law school, and I looked at JD MBA programs specifically because I was interested in doing both the joint law and the business degree. And I happened to get accepted to Harvard Law School, which was followed up by an acceptance to Harvard Business School. So I just felt quite fortunate to have the opportunity while I was there. But again, they're very different schools, and I did look at other schools and other universities. I think some people worry about, and I think it's slightly more of a valid concern, if you're doing a PhD, which I know some of you might be interested in, whether you're in the sciences or in the social sciences or in the humanities, sometimes the faculty will encourage you to go to a different school for graduate school than you did for undergrad, for college. And part of that is exposure to different schools of thought, to study under different professors and to expose it. They don't want you to stay in just one department for your whole academic career. And I think that's a valid concern. So if you're thinking of doing a PhD, I think switching and going to a different school is actually probably a very good idea. When you're doing business school or medical school or a professional degree, I think the diversity is a little bit less important because you have a different faculty, you have a different approach, and so it gives you that experience. And again, I think the students, the faculty, and the opportunities at Harvard's graduate schools were unmatched from any of the other schools I looked at.
Sure. Can you demystify brand Harvard for us? So Harvard is this, it has this image. It's almost, it's for lots. It's out of reach, and obviously it's been in your reach and your grasp. So can you just demystify? Tell us about, what is brand Harvard about?
I think. Again, I told you when I was growing up, to think that I'd be sitting here and talking about Harvard with all of my firsthand experience, I never would have imagined it either. And I think I always thought that it was this unreachable thing. I think one of the things that makes Harvard as great and as enriching as it is are really the people. And the people are the students. I think Harvard has done a phenomenal job in selecting its student body over the years so that they bring together some of the brightest minds in the world who are most passionate and who have very different interests from each other. Our undergraduate curriculum is focused on the liberal arts. So it's not just all students studying engineering, not all students studying medicine, it's not all students studying business. It's students who have various interests from various parts of the world. And I've been very impressed with the commitment Harvard has made over the last few years to make sure that they can help students from anywhere in the world, whether they can afford it or not, if they're qualified to be able to come, they've been able to give them that opportunity. So they've created generous financial aid programs in order to do that. And they've brought together a collection of people that just enrich your experience. I've always been very humbled by the students and just the minds that I've been surrounded by, as well as the faculty. I think our Harvard faculty sometimes get an unfair portrayal as being, unreachable and inaccessible, which quite honestly they're not at all. They're people. They're very accomplished. In order to be a Harvard professor, I think you have to be, the world's leading expert in whatever it is that you do, which I always found intimidating, but they're actually very eager. They went into this profession because they want to inspire other people to take up their area of study. It's a cause that they've dedicated their life's work to, and they really want to inspire young people to follow in their path. And so I always found that these professors would hold office hours, and sometimes they would complain that students wouldn't come to the office hours because they were too intimidated to come visit them in the office. So they're sitting in the office by themselves, sitting at the computer. They have a sign-up sheet on the door, and no one shows up. I'm always the type of person that would show up and knock on the door. I have access to this Nobel Peace Prize winner. I go out. One of my history professors, she won the Pulitzer Prize for historical nonfiction. I went to her office. I said, "How did it feel to win the Pulitzer Prize?" And she said, "Pretty great." But they're people, and they really are. They're really interested. And so I think that's the one thing to keep in mind, is that Harvard is a place that, because of how long it's been around, and because of the people who have gone through it, the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Thoreau and Emerson, John F. Kennedy, because of the alumni that they produced, they've been able to kind of build this reinforcing network of people who are interested in advancing knowledge. And so I don't know. I think it's accessible. I think that's the one thing that to demystify is very accessible. And if you were to if you had the opportunity to visit Boston and visit Cambridge and walk around and stop anyone and speak to them and ask them about it, they're very normal people. And we were talking about the other day, they're very passionate, they're very excited. And I think many of us feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to attend. They can only accept, 1,650 students per year into a Harvard class. And I'm positive that there are more than 1,650 people who are qualified. There's some statistic about the number of people with perfect SAT scores that they turn away every year. And it's not just about SAT scores. So that's something I know VIBA and ReachIvy have done a lot of looking into. It's not just SAT scores. What's the rest of the profile you need to have? But I think we feel very fortunate that we were granted one of those spots. And so we want to take the most advantage of the opportunity we've been given. And I think you just have a lot of passionate and excited people all in one place. And it's just such a stimulating environment.
3 words to describe Harvard.
All right. It's hard to pick 3 words. It's just, I don't know. I think excellence is one of them, right? But not excellence meaning, like Harvard's better than everyone else. And I think it has a lot of things that it's great at or the greatest at, but it's excellence meaning it looks for excellence in people. It looks for people who have a commitment to doing their best and to advancing something. kind of like I was talking about before, advancing fields of knowledge. That's what we're really interested in. So it's, maybe I should have picked exploration rather than excellence. Maybe that would be my second word, is exploration. I think exploring, they want people who can explore, but also, I was talking to someone earlier who said he was thinking of studying, either psychology or economics, and that's what a liberal arts education is meant to allow you to do, to spend some time exploring different fields of knowledge, different areas of thought and ways of thinking. And it really encourages you to take those risks. And so if you're interested in forensic anthropology, to go ahead and go out to Greece or India or somewhere outside of Cambridge, Massachusetts, to actually see what that looks like in a different part of the world, or to go on an archaeological dig, or to actually visit whatever it is that you're studying in your books. And Harvard has several sources you can apply to, but also internationally there are databases of fellowships and grants and scholarships that you can apply to that provide funding for you to kind of explore your passion. But also, most, I think, of the freshmen that I've worked with, they come into Harvard with a high school mentality of what they can study. So they think, I need to take one math class, one science class, one history class, one English class. Why? What is the point behind it? You can do that, but there are also going to be so many fields in college that students were not exposed to in high school, and so it's time to explore. I think the last one I'd say is diversity. I think diversity is one of the things that helps to set Harvard apart. We have a diversity in the global sense. We have a student body and a faculty at each of the schools that come from all over the world. And that brings a different perspective that I found invaluable. In business school, sitting and hearing, I have a very American perspective because that's where I'm from. I'm from the US, I grew up there. I've spent most of my time working there. But to hear from our classmates, from Vibha's experiences here in India, from some of my classmates who have worked in France or in Saudi Arabia, the different challenges that they face, the different cultural forces that have shaped who they are and also how they approach problems, the different ways of thought that I never would have come across on my own, as well as the diversity of interests. I think there's something, when I was in law school, we'd have conversations in the classroom, and then you'd go to lunch and you'd continue to talk about the law. And then you'd go to dinner and you'd talk about the law, and you'd be riding on the subway and you talk about the law. And that's great. And the law is actually very fascinating, and there's a lot that you can think about. And once you start law school, your mind just fires, and you see different legal arguments all over the place. And you look at that chair, and you're thinking about what would happen if the chair broke, who would be liable, and how you can't get away from it. But when you're in such an area of academic diversity, when I was working as a proctor, living with Harvard undergrads, there were graduate students from the different schools, from the design school, from the medical school, from the public health school. And the conversations that you have, or the classmates that you meet who have interests different from your own, really transforms you. And most of the opportunities, I'd say, that made the biggest impression on me while I was an undergrad or when I was in business school, generally happened by serendipity. It was very I was in a place where I was having a conversation with someone who had a very different experience than me, and I said, I was thinking, I'm going to go home this summer, I'm going to work for my family business, and they said, there's this one opportunity that I did last summer where I got to write for a travel guide, and I'm going to be the editor of that travel guide this summer for the book in Greece. Your family's Greek, you've studied Greek, maybe I should talk to you about it. And I said, tell me more. And she said, well, actually, I'm going to be hiring some researchers to go to Greece and to write for this travel guide. And if you were interested, I'd be willing to talk to you about it. And so I ended up spending a summer writing for a travel guide in Greece because I was surrounded by someone who did something completely different. She was interested in journalism and in publishing. And I was interested in, government and law and business. And I never would have thought of the opportunity, but it came up, and I got to spend 8 weeks traveling around Greece, trying all the food, staying in the, hotels and the hostels and visiting the museums and writing about it. And I got to be published at the age of, 19. That was great. That was very exciting, but something I wouldn't have thought of. And it comes that way also from, the way that Vibha and I worked together writing a Harvard Business School case that ended up being taught at Harvard Business School, was that there was this gentleman that came to speak in one of my classes at the law school, and I said, this is a very different argument. He's a lawyer by trade, but he's very active in this interesting area of how the U.S. is recovering from the financial crisis and how the U.S. government is holding companies responsible. Is anyone interested in attending? So Vibha came with me to the talk, and then we approached the speaker after the talk. We said, we think what you're doing is very interesting. we'd like to write about it and study you. And actually, if we can influence some of the work you're doing to reshape executive compensation at the top financial firms in the US, we'd love to do that. And then we had the opportunity just because, we were sharing our different interests with each other, and we took advantage of the opportunity we had. So it goes everywhere else, though. I'm talking about, my interests, but exposure to the arts, exposure to the sciences, to the social sciences, to the humanities. I think that's something that, graduate schools, when they're building a class, like at Harvard Business School, Harvard Law School, or any of the top schools, they look for building a class where the students are going to have something to teach and learn from each other. And so if all of your students applying to law school had studied law already, or all your students applying to business school had studied finance, they're going to have very similar perspectives, similar experiences. But if you are, an admissions officer sitting in a law school, and all of a sudden you see someone that studied East Asian art and literature, rather than law or economics, you're going to say, that's very interesting. I wonder why this student is interested in law. I wonder what they could show. One of my great classmates at law school, she was actually a biochemist. And she was very interested in intellectual property law and how patents work, how they protect inventions, innovation, not only in the US, but globally, especially with all the development we're seeing right now in biotechnology. And she had a very different way of thinking and brought that to me. And so I think the diversity and the richness of that student body, of the faculty, of our alumni, is one of the things that sets Harvard apart.
Sure. And having spent 8 years at Harvard, the underbelly of the school, the administration, and you're sort of totally linked in with what's going on the campus. If there was one thing you could change about Harvard, what would it be?
Other than to make it longer, I think 4 years doesn't seem like enough. When you're in college is such a great experience, right? Everyone would like to prolong it because there's so many other things I would have wanted to do while I was there. I think, Harvard recently has made a big push toward encouraging our students to pursue an international experience. And that's a hard sell, right? Because you only have 8 semesters that you get to spend in Cambridge as a Harvard student. Why would you want to leave for one of them? But all of my friends and classmates that have gone an international experience, that's one of the most defining moments of their life. And so I think finding more ways to help expose people to those international experiences. Harvard Business School this year introduced a module where they actually make their MBA students go work on a company and a project in a different country with some of our alumni and actually launch a business and do an actual business project. And I think that's something I would have liked to have done and I would have liked to have been forced to do because it's, again, so hard. You work all your life to be able to go to Harvard and say, oh, I'm going to leave during part of that. It's a hard thing to convince yourself just psychologically to do. But I think that's a big one. The other thing, I don't know. I think different schools take different approaches. I think Harvard has a very good balance of the residential community, feeling like you're part of a community. It's also integrated within a city, and it's integrated the college within a bigger university, or each of the schools within a bigger university. I spent a lot of my time, the last few years, I served on the Harvard Graduate Council, and I became president of this Harvard Graduate Council, a student government that oversaw the 12 graduate and professional schools of Harvard. And I spent a lot of time working with our president of Harvard and the provost on ways to link the schools together. I think that's kind of the next phase in higher education. You're going to see it and you're going to hear about it a lot. It's interdisciplinary cooperation. And I think the more that we can start to deconstruct the barriers and the silos between the fields and between the disciplines, I think the arts have a lot to teach the sciences. I think that the study of religion and the study of politics have a lot that they can learn from each other. The more of an environment we can create where people from the design school have access to the people at the business school, or the entrepreneurs at the business school have access to the people who are at our School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, the more collaboration that we can do, the better. But again, it's a short period of time, and it's a big school with a lot of people. So it takes students and it takes faculty who are very proactive and who are very interested in that cooperation and collaboration. But there are many examples at Harvard. Right now our Stem Cell Institute is pulling together scientists from Harvard Medical School and from the science departments and from the public health school. They're also talking to ethicists and to philosophers and to people active in government. Those are kind of the big issues coming, and I think the more interdisciplinary and cooperative that we can become, the better. And that's one of the advantages of being in college, right? You can study in the different fields. You can learn from the leaders in each of these things. You can
But from an Indian mindset, we some of us just want to become engineers, and we've known that. Our parents have known that. They groom us to become engineers or doctors, or come back and run the family business. So when we're not looking at this sort of interdisciplinary approach, do you think Harvard's still a good choice of school, or would you recommend going to like an MIT if you want to become an engineer? Just go to MIT and get that degree. I know it's hard for you to say, go to MIT, but
MIT is a fantastic school, and I think if I had had the opportunity to go there rather than Harvard, I think it would have been a great opportunity, great school. Again, I mean, I would never say anything terrible. I think it's such a great opportunity to have. I think I would be very fortunate to have gotten in and to have been able to go to MIT. I think it's a very personal choice and a personal decision. I think there is a difference in mindset between a liberal arts education and a pre-professional or a very practical education. And I think what you've told me about the Indian mindset is a little bit more practically oriented, that you think, okay, like, what are you going to do with your degree? How is that going to help you get to the next thing? And I think parents, that's a very important question, and I'm sure it's one that you're going to ask your children for the rest of their lives. But I do think that the liberal arts approach is different in that it's seeking to educate the whole person and the whole mind. And I think that I've picked up some great lessons for law and for business in some of the most unlikely places. From some of my art courses, or from, I was looking at a painting in a certain way, appreciating how, the 17th century French style, was, and then it gave me an idea of how you take an idea that you know from history and you apply it in a new context, or you take something and you situate it differently. And, when we look at business models, or when you look at a legal argument, a lot of the analytical skills you develop in different professions, you can bring, and that creativity and also that thought. So it's just a very different type of education. I think if someone knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that I want to be an engineer and I want to devote my life to engineering, then sure, it might make sense to go into an engineering program and to pursue the best engineering program. And I think Harvard has a fantastic one, but MIT does, or there are a lot of, great tech schools that are dedicated to that. Or if you want to be a doctor, you might look at, which has the best pre-med program. But also, our doctors, at least in the United States, I don't know here in India, our doctors, one of the greater problems about some of our doctors is they understand medicine, they understand the science so well, but they might not understand how the practice of medicine has developed as an industry, and how to run a business, or how to run finance, or how to interact with people. And so I think our doctors have something to learn by a liberal arts education, and then focusing, you do your pre-med requirements, you take your chemistry, biology, physics, math, but you also take some humanities, and you also understand the history of civilizations. You study a little bit about Indian culture, or you study Greek poetry. I think there's something to be learned from that. So it depends. It's a personal decision, but I do think there's something special about the liberal arts education that broadens the mind and allows you to have more focus. And I think it leads to a slightly more fulfilling experience, but again, I think it's a very personal decision. I also think it's hard to know when you're 17 or 18 years old what you're going to be passionate about for the rest of your lives. And I think that's a hard decision to kind of lock yourself down to. So I'm someone who's always enjoyed exploring and leaving myself open to possibilities. And I think that you have a little bit more of an opportunity to do that at a liberal arts school. But again, someone else sitting here could make a very strong argument for why a technical or pre-professional or practical experience is a superior one. And who's to say which of us would be right?
So now you're done. You have the 3 degrees. You've had the interdisciplinary education. What's next?
Well, immediately I'm joining McKinsey, which is a world-class company, has offices all over the world. It's one of the reasons I'm interested in it, right? They've got experts in every field, and they've looked at every type of problem, and they help large companies, they help governments, they help foundations like the Clinton Foundation or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Teach for America, with these big problems that they're facing. I'm moving to their Washington, D.C. office with the hopes that I'll be able to work on some of their public sector clients. We have a lot of large federal agencies in the United States government who are looking at some interesting challenges right now as we think about how our government works, how it might work better. And that brings some of the legal training in with the business training. But I think I've always viewed my life not as what's the one thing that I'm going to do, but what's the order in which I'm going to approach the 17 things that I'd like to do. I have a different idea every day, and I'm really driven by entrepreneurship, about change, about leading change, and the opportunity to do that. I'm also very interested in the U.S. in looking at the ways that our private sector and our private businesses work together with the government to solve problems. I think our system of government in the U.S. is very, very fantastic. I love it, but it also has shortcomings, like any government would. And I think sometimes the government needs help and active partnership and cooperation with the private sector in order to solve some of the leading problems, whether it's access to clean water, whether it's curing cancer, whether it's national security. So I'm very interested in looking at that, and I've spent some time doing social enterprise work. I spent time working with an organization devoted to affordable housing in the United States and changing the way that our policy works. I helped write policy proposals that we sent to Congress and to the Obama administration that helped influence some of the reforms that they're implementing now. I did a lot of work on some economic recovery stuff in the U.S., and that's what I'm motivated by it. How you take kind of law, legal arguments, and the way that we structure our public policy in the U.S. and change it in a way that it's a partnership between our companies, between our individuals, and between our government leaders to really kind of improve the situation, not only in the U.S., but around the world.
Share some piece of advice for some of the young applicants here. What should they be looking at, and how should they approach the whole application process?
I think my number one piece of advice is be yourself. I think a lot of pressure is put on people when they're applying to, create this image and package it up all neatly so that it shows a certain type of thing. But an application, at least from my experience and from what I know for universities in the United States, they want to know about the applicant. They want to know you. They want to know how you think and who you are and what you've done, and they want to see that presented. They don't want you to tell them what you think they want to see, because that's not real and that's not how you get in. I was talking before we started with someone who asked questions like, what are they looking for? As if there were some checklist. And I know that, in I study a little bit of international law, and in Indian form of law, it's very rules and regulations based. So I think there's a cultural tendency to want to check off the box. Okay, you do this, you do that, and then you get in. The mindset that I've become familiar with at American universities is that they want that. There are certain things that they're minimums, but they really want to understand you as a person, and they think about how are you going to make the most of this opportunity. If you're granted admission over someone else, what would give me as an admissions officer confidence in your ability to make something of that opportunity? Academically, while you're there, I want to see that you have the ability to succeed. It's not fair for me as an admissions officer, and I'm not one, but it wouldn't be fair for me to put someone who I didn't think would be able to succeed into a situation where they're now not going to be able to do well. They want you to do well, and so they want to see that you have the academics that it takes. But they also want to see that you're driven by something, that you're passionate by something, that you take your interests to the next level, that you pursue something deeply, that you're not just joining 25 different clubs and organizations or working for this company or that experience because you want to get into college, but that you're taking on these responsibilities, you're taking on these projects, these challenges, you're solving some problems because that's what you wanted to do. That was what was most important to you. And they want to understand that. And so in the essays, for example, I think it's really important, as I said earlier, that you show something of how you think as a person, or in the references that you choose, or in the activities that you want to showcase. You want it to all reinforce the image of who you are, and it's really personal. That's why I think it's important, why I think ReachIvy is a great type of organization to work with. You need someone who has experience going through the process, who understands the way that the application works, how it's viewed, but how you put together a comprehensive narrative, one holistic picture of yourself, where each piece reinforces who you are. Because you don't have a lot of space in the context of an application, it's important to think about how each piece fits together, building that picture and building that puzzle. And that's why I think it's good to have an advisor kind of work with you who has a personal expertise that can kind of show you and kind of help you think about it in a different way. It's good to have an objective set of eyes or experience to kind of read through it and give you that. But you can't ever let your parents or your friends or your college counselor or ReachIvy write it for you or tell you who you are or tell you what colleges want to hear. They want to know about you. So I think it's really important to kind of figure that out, to be very personal, but to also be willing to kind of take a stand. If you have 20 ideas of what you'd like to do, that's good. You can say that briefly, but focus on one of them to give them insight to how you think about one thing.
And there's lots of mothers in the room here, so any advice for the moms in the room?
I think my advice for parents generally is trust your children. You have to, if you're the type of parents who are so conscientious to be here at this talk, I'm willing to bet that you're the type of parents who have been very active and very conscientious in the way that you've raised your children. And so you need to put a little bit of trust in them to make some good decisions. Sometimes decisions that you might not have made yourself or you might have not made for them. But you need to kind of trust them and to see it as a partnership. I remember the time when I was applying to college. It's very stressful. And at 17, 18 years of age, to think that this is a decision that's going to affect the rest of your life, and to hear it every day from your mom, it's, I think my mom locked me in my room and said, write your essay. You can't come out until you do. I'm sure I was crying and like stressed. But I think really, you've raised your children to be who they are, and you need to trust in their decisions. And sometimes they might decide, like, oh, maybe I don't want to go into medicine, or maybe I don't want to go be an engineer. I'd like to try this for a period of time. And I think it's important as parents to question those assumptions and challenge your students, but also be supportive of them. I also think that parents can help your children know, what sets them apart. Help them with their applications, not write it for them, not do it for them, but say, oh, like, did you think about this or did you think about that? I think parents are a great sounding board. And then when you send your students off to college, I think, again, like, it's really hard. And if you're sending your students to the US from India, I can imagine as a parent how that's tough because it's so far away, and you really want to know what they're doing and be a part of that experience. And I think that's something you need to work with your child about, is how you to go through this experience together and how you learn about what they're doing. I think as students, we're not always good at calling home and explaining what great things we did, or like why all of a sudden we've decided that we want to go into forensic anthropology instead of finance. But ask your children questions, challenge them, but continue to be supportive. I think, it's a stressful time for everyone. It's stressful for parents. And at the end of the day, like, I think you need to trust that it's going to work out. Like, don't be afraid to take risks, right? I think some people were asking questions about early decision or early action. Is it better to apply to a school that you think you'll get into, because that's a sure thing, and I'm going to apply because that'll be lined up and it'll be fine? Or should I reach for a school like a Harvard or a Stanford or a whatever? If that's where you want to go, if that's where your child wants to go ahead, take the risk. You can apply to the other one that you thought you'd get into. If you thought it was a sure thing during early, it's probably a sure thing during the regular admission. And so worst thing, you wasted a couple months taking the chance on the school that you most wanted to attend, or the school that most resonates with your child. So I'd encourage you to take risks. I know people, you were telling me some people are very apprehensive because you try, but I go back to my high school in Maine, and I tell people, if you don't try, if you don't at least apply to Harvard, that's the one way to guarantee you won't get into Harvard, is if you never submit the application, they can't say yes. So you have to give a school like a Harvard or whatever school, MIT, Duke, whatever school you're looking at that you really most want to go to, you need to give them an opportunity to say yes. So it might be taking a risk, and you know what, if they say no, well, you're no further behind than you were before. You have the regular application cycle to go.
Before we open it up, Aaron was the 2036th person to join Facebook. So please share with us an anecdote, since Mark was your classmate and you were there during the whole Facebook phenomenon. What happened?
It's funny, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Social Network, but I was actually sitting in the theater in Harvard Square watching the movie, and all of a sudden the camera pans over Harvard Square right where I was sitting. It was kind of creepy. I was looking up. I don't know, I think when I was watching the movie and remembering my experiences, it really made me think about what it was like to be at Harvard as a student, and that level of excitement, the idea that I think most of us have when we're younger, that anything's possible. And I think the more you learn and the more that life experience you have, the more jaded you become, and you forget about those hopes and dreams. And I think, Mark was someone who, he's very smart and he's very driven, and he had very firm ideas about how things would work. But I remember I was interviewed by the Harvard newspaper. It's the second article ever written about Facebook in February 2004. And they called me up. It was the second week of Facebook, and I was a late joiner. That was late, right? I waited 2 weeks to join Facebook. I couldn't understand. I was like, why are people going to put their real information? I don't get what you friend, you connect, poke, what is this poke? Like, but so I was a late joiner, and I had racked up, they were really very impressed, I had racked up 136 friends. Whoa, like, right? Now everyone here has like 5,000, so it's nothing. So they call me, and I think I said in the interview, I was like, oh, I can't imagine I ever have more than 300 friends. That's crazy. But I showed them the article the other day. It said, oh, like, what do you think of the website? And I said, I'm very proud of Mark. I think he's developed a great site. It's very interesting, but I'm very interested to see whether or not this Facebook is a short-term phenomenon. It might just burn out. And so I guess it shouldn't have been a surprise when I graduated. I got accepted to Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School during my senior year of college. I applied during my senior year. And I got a 2-year deferral to go work for 2 years. So I sent Mark an email. I said, hey, Mark, here things are going well at Facebook. Would love to, think about it. I think you're thinking of growing the company, maybe trying to take it public. This was back when a lot of IPOs were happening with tech companies. And he wrote me back. He said, hey, Aaron, congratulations. Very excited for you. Glad that you got into Harvard Business School, Harvard Law School. That's a great accomplishment. But what would you do for us? We develop websites. You don't really have the skills that we value. So it was a very humbling experience. You talk about the Harvard. But at the end of the day, it's, what you learn, what you can do, and how you apply it. But I think, Mark is the type of person that you get to meet at Harvard, and I don't think any of us had now he's one of the richest people in the world and very, very smart, and he's taken his passion and he's applied it somewhere. And when he built the site, I don't think he thought it was going to become what it's become. I think he had a big vision for it, but I think it just shows you the type of people that you're surrounded by who have these big ideas, who think about them differently, and I find that to be so inspiring. I think Mark is a great example, but I could pick any number of my classmates, and some of them are not now billionaires. A lot of them, they might be working for an NGO in Africa, or they might be, teaching in a school in the Mississippi Delta, but they're very passionate, they're very driven, and they want to take their ideas or their passion and put it to use in the world. So any number of people would be great to
Aaron, we hope you put your passions to use in the world as well. We're going to open it up for audience questions. Would anyone have any questions? Please feel free. Harsh, Mike. Yeah.
Hello, Aaron. My name is Harsh. I'm applying this year for MBA. And really the biggest question I have in my mind is that when I apply, if I do get in, which is I'm really getting ahead of myself.
I'm with you. I'm seeing it.
But what's the biggest difference between a Harvard and a Columbia?
I think it's really important to get to know the different schools that you're applying to, because when you have your chance to take electives in courses, I didn't necessarily always choose my course that I was going to take based on the name of the course. I usually chose it based on the professor that was teaching it. And so it depends what field you want to go into. Some schools, like Wharton, for example, is very known for finance, and it has a great reputation. And that's not to say that Harvard Business School isn't a great school to go for finance, because it is. But if you're very passionate about finance, and if there are professors at Wharton or professors at Columbia is known, for many different things. I think it does a lot in media and publishing that you won't see at other schools. And so each school has a slightly different set of faculty that have different expertise. And I think that the faculty really make the experience, at least in graduate school and professional school. The professors are a lot more important. So sometimes it takes time researching the schools, researching their faculty, reading their CVs, looking at their research, looking at their accomplishments, where they've worked, what they've done, what they study, what courses you might take. I think that's the way to kind of look at it. I also think it depends. There is a difference to living and attending school in New York. If you're looking for a New York City experience, I think it's different. Harvard Business School, for instance, has a very contained campus. It's all set by itself. It's in Boston. It's close to Boston, but it's really separate from the city. Columbia or an NYU Stern are very integrated in New York City, and a lot of people that attend there are going to have lives outside of business school as well. But you're also surrounded by, the companies, and you can get to them easily. One of the great things that was possible in business school is clubs and organizations would arrange these treks where you'd actually go to New York, or if you're interested in hospitality, you might go to Las Vegas and visit the casinos and actually get tours and see how, from business leaders and alumni, how these organizations work.
The Silicon Valley trek we had to.
Silicon Valley, yeah. India,
Vegas for media. I mean, they covered it all.
China, they go everywhere, right? And so being in an environment where you're surrounded by the types of people, and you might spend some time looking at the alumni too. I think we felt very supported by our alumni from Harvard Business School. Yeah. They're very receptive when you reach out to them and you ask them for advice. And I had the opportunity to work for a Harvard Business School alum. I had the opportunity to work for a Harvard Law School alum. And they really take an active interest in your career and in helping you to think about how to use your education and use your experience and develop. So looking for a school and looking to understand kind of what they might specialize in, what professors they might have or areas of study that they might emphasize, and how accessible that's going to be. For instance, some of our top professors at Harvard Business School, I think if I were to change something about Harvard Business School, some of the top professors, the classes are the most popular, so only 90 or 180 students can get to take that one course with, Young Mi Moon in consumer marketing. Michael Porter is a rock star, right? Everyone wants to study Michael Porter. So So how accessible are the faculty going to be, and what experience are you looking for, and what field, and are you going to have access to that field? I think those are the types of questions to ask.
I also suggest looking at the student body, because I got to go to school with someone like Aaron, who has like completely different experiences, who's so motivated, so bright, and he's probably going to take over the world at some point. So.
I have a question. Our certainly
Mike.
one of the best schools, like many others around the world. We even have ISB here in India, which is equally, My question is, what is the real value addition? If you take that as an index of many business schools, what is the value addition that Harvard provides? Because you get student body which comes at a certain level, at a certain standards, and they finish off at a certain level.
Right.
So my question is, has there been some kind of an index study in the United States for good business schools or good schools, where what is the value addition that has been given to a student? Because as the world is changing and the whole economic gravity is shifting to this part of the world, China, India, and Brazil, and stuff like that. So my question is really, what is the real value addition that a school like Harvard provides?
Sure, I think that's a good question. I think it's a fair question. I think the problem with answering it is that there are plenty of organizations, whether it's a magazine in the U.S., like U.S. News and World Reports, that want to rank schools, and they pick what they're going to rank based on starting salary of your alumni, based on number of CEOs in the Fortune 500 or the Global 2000. They look at a number of different things, but all of those are subjective measures. You have to decide, you have some level of subjectivity when you're picking what you're going to include in your ranking system. The thing I think that sets Harvard Business School apart is the way it trains, I think, our MBAs to approach problems differently. So the case method that they use to teach, where they actually, rather than just giving lectures to the students saying, this is how you do accounting, or this is how marketing works, or these are Porter's 5 forces of strategy, they actually write firsthand cases, and they have access to some of the world's leading business people. And so whether it's in Jack Welch from GE, who comes in and we read a story about him, and we work through, it puts the student in the eyes of Jack Welch. I would be very, very flattered to ever have the opportunity to be in Jack Welch's position leading GE. I'd probably be way in over my head. But it gives you some of the challenges that he faces. It gives you the data that he had available to him at the time, and he says, work through it. What would you do? Challenge him, criticize him. And then they bring him in, they put him in the room, and they say, okay, Vibha, why don't you tell us, if you were Jack Welch, what would you have done differently? Or let's say that you're Jack Welch's, counselor, and you're saying to him, you should have done this, you should have done this.
This is where Jack Welch actually physically present in the room.
He sits right next to you. They sit you right next to him, and then Jack Welch stares right back at you, yells in your face. And they have access to people like Jack Welch, or someone was saying earlier about Ferran Adria. He came and we did a case on El Bulli, and we understood the way that
Ferran Adrian is this master chef from El Bulli, a restaurant in Barcelona. So they had him come in as well. So it's not just the Jack Welches, it's the chefs and the artists, and they have it all.
And they're all over the world. I think Harvard Business School right now is making an active under our current dean, Nitin Noria, who's from India himself. He's very focused on helping guide Harvard Business School into what he calls the global century, and really increasing the number of international cases that we have with case protagonists, the person the case is about and whose mindset it puts you into. So I think that's the one thing that sets Harvard Business School apart is I'm not going to be in most of these situations. I'm never going to be running molecular gastronomy restaurant in Spain, or a hedge fund in China, or a consumer packaged goods company in Cincinnati, Ohio. But to understand those problems and to put myself in that first person, I think that's a very different pedagogical approach that Harvard Business School has taken. And if you look at, I think there are a number of objective measures you could look at, again, like the salaries, career placements, number of CEOs, but just in meeting our alumni and having meetings with them, I had the opportunity to, on one of these trips to New York, to meet with a gentleman who started his own hedge fund. And their hedge fund in the financial crisis was one of the only to bet against subprime mortgages in the U.S. And so they made something to the tune of $20 billion U.S. In one deal. His name is John Paulson, and when you meet him and you have a conversation with him, he doesn't think in specific terms of what skills did you have, is your accounting perfect, are your double entries made accurately. He actually gets in your face and tries to understand how you make decisions, and whether he trusts your instincts, and whether you trust how you've incorporated your learning into the decisions that you make. So I think Harvard Business School is very much focused on decision making and how you think through that, and then they teach very differently. But I think I'd be hard pressed to give you an objective measure to say Harvard ranks here and this and that. And I think that a number of organizations do try. So it depends which of those that you're interested in, where you'll find out.
One week at school, we had a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday speaker. Monday was the CEO of Walt Disney, Wednesday was the CEO of Airbus, and Friday was the CEO of Louis Vuitton. And you have access to the CEOs of like 3 absolutely diverse industries and leaders, and you can just go meet them, shake hands with them, have a conversation with them. So it's the access points the school provides.
And I'll tell you, Vibha met all of them and shook hands with all of them.
I'm going to shake hands with you too, man.
I know, but I'll never forget, what was the CEO, was it Citibank? Came in and Vibha said, "Oh, how did you make those mistakes in the financial crisis?" She got that up. Not shy at all, so great opportunities.
Because typically when you go to business school, you worked for someone for those 3 or 4 or 5 years. And now they put you in the seat of the decision maker and say, hey, what would you do if you were running this company, or if you were the finance minister of China? Would you devalue the yuan? So, you're suddenly in the decision making seat and you're thinking from that perspective. So that's the value addition. Any questions?
Executive education programs at Harvard and Duke especially. Do you have any opinion on what these executive MBA programs, they are worth? They're very expensive. They're almost as expensive as a normal MBA. So any light you can shed on that, and what programs?
They're more expensive than the MBAs. They actually finance they subsidize the MBA program.
Yeah, so they're
in a lot
very
of ways.
expensive. They're only for like a couple of months, and you can do it over a couple of years. And they have all these like different programs. So do you have any kind of insight or opinion on that? If they're worth it or whatever?
I think one of the advantages of an executive MBA over like the traditional MBA, the traditional MBA is a very different thing. I think they're very focused on a very specific area, so they're generally very useful for a professional that's already reached a certain level on a career track. And so I think that they tend to look in things. I think it depends. I think it grants you access to faculty that have great experience in that one area, and I think we share professors, so our faculty from Harvard Business School that teach in the MBA program also teach in the executive education programs. And I think that you have access to them, but you have access to them at a higher level of sophistication when you're dealing with people who have been in those jobs, in those careers, who are making those decisions, and who are actually working at companies where they're going to continue with those types of activities. So I think it's very specific. It also connects you to that network. It makes you part of an alumni network. It connects you to the professors and to the faculty, and it gives you access to the resources. So it's very different, and it is very expensive. And I think one of the reasons it's expensive is just because market pricing. They know that a lot of companies will pay to send their executives to these executive ed programs, so they've just jacked up the prices to take advantage of that. But I think
also, if you didn't go to business school and you spent the last 10 or 15 years building up your business, you now lack this perspective, a global perspective on your business. Because let's say you've been focusing on just building your firm up. Now you go to business school for executive MBA and you're suddenly in this cohort with people from all across the world, probably same industries or different perspectives. So you suddenly have this new, fresh perspective to your own business. So if you've been deep diving into your own firm, now you get this additional benefit.
And that additional benefit, I think it actually is similar to what I was saying to college students. The other people that are going to be in that executive education program with you are also going to be some of the greatest assets of that program. You're going to be with other people at a similar maturity in their career who are making similar decisions, who then become part of your professional network. They become part of people that you can call on when you're making tough business decisions or approaching a new thing. And so it definitely helps to develop your professional network in that way as well.
And you get alumni status as well, so you can say you're a Harvard alumnus.
Outside of the classroom, it's such a rich experience and a rich environment. I was very active in student government, and I was at Harvard at a very interesting time, so I got to work on this President Summers led overhaul of Harvard undergraduate experience. He did a curricular review where they examined every aspect of the undergraduate experience and said, what should we do differently? How should we change it? What investments should we make for the next decade, for the next century? How should we think about Harvard's place in the world, and what we're teaching our students to think, to study, to question, and to become? And that was really great because I got to sit on several committees with Harvard faculty and administrators and give a student's perspective into these things. And so I learned a lot, not just about those specific issues we were studying, like what questions you should have on the course evaluation or what courses you should require people to take, but about how decisions are made, about how you work with people, about how you influence people when they have more power than you do? How do you get them to adopt one of your suggestions and take it through? And I think for people who are interested in being journalists, you can learn about it in the classroom, but it's not until you're actually writing for a newspaper that becomes a valuable experience. So a lot of students who've worked for the Harvard Crimson, I was just visiting a classmate of mine who worked for the Harvard newspaper and then got hired to work for Forbes. And then they sent her to Hong Kong, and she was writing for Forbes in Hong Kong. Like, that's such a great experience, right? And it didn't come necessarily out of the classroom, it came out of extracurriculars. And there are a lot of examples of that. I've had students who were very interested in dance, and they've taken the dance on that they now do it professionally, or they discover career opportunities through their extracurriculars. So Harvard undergrad has great women in business program. So for female students interested in business, it's kind of both supportive, but it also helps them get internships and jobs. There are some just strictly social clubs that you can join, kind of like fraternal organization, although we have slightly different social clubs than the fraternities at Harvard, and I was never really part of them. And then at business school, there are a lot of career-oriented extracurriculars. So there's like, if you're interested in retail and luxury goods, there's the Retail and Luxury Goods Club. Or if you're interested in real estate, there's the Real Estate Club. And you actually go outside of the classroom and you become active in that sector, in that industry. You interact with alumni. You put on a conference. I was in an entrepreneurship club, and I arranged a panel for our entrepreneurship conference where I got to bring in leaders of, Kiva, which does micro investment throughout the world, or in micro lending. We brought in leaders from other social enterprises that were doing sustainable things around the U.S. and around the world. But there were also panels with leaders in every different sector, and conferences on marketing or on public health or on how you change different things. So extracurriculars are a big part. At the law school, it's a little bit more academic outside of the classroom. You join law journals, or you actually start practicing. So I was in a bankruptcy clinic where I actually had my own clients that I would help them file for bankruptcy in the U.S. courts. They were usually low-income clients who were dealing with a financial hardship. But you got these practical and very valuable experiences. Many times they're advised by or led by leaders in that field, and that's a very rewarding experience, but it's also a way to meet people that you might not have a classroom experience with, and often those shared experiences over an extracurricular activity are the strong ones. And some of my closest friends are the ones that I was in the same clubs or groups or student government with, and those are my friends for life. Those are the people who the people I write a case with about the economic crisis are the people I call up and say, hey, I'd like to come to Mumbai and see what it's like in India, and can I stay on your couch? And that's where you kind of get some of those relationships and exposure.
And living in like hostels, boarding houses.
And the dorms?
The dorms, sorry, that's the problem. But I mean, do you live with other students from other departments?
Yes.
Or do they have like a law school dorm?
The graduate schools are all separate, but they have some graduate student housing. People, they mix it together. So it depends on your preference. You can choose to live on campus at Harvard Business School if you're a business school student, or you can live in general graduate student housing. Law school, same thing. The college is by itself, and the college is all mixed, so it's students studying a number of things, and you have a chance to pick after your freshman year, your first year, the college assigns you, and they look at your housing form, and they try to put you together with someone they think you'll be compatible with, but someone who's also different from you. They think that's one of the things about going to college as a first-year student. You have to adjust to living with other students. A lot of people are used to growing up at home, having their own room, having their own space. All of a sudden, you're put into a dorm situation with other students with different backgrounds. But that's part of the learning experience too. When I was working with my freshmen, one of the, I think, most valuable lessons that you can learn during your freshman year at college is how to have an honest conversation with someone who's annoying you, right? If someone's playing their music too loud, like, how do you go and have a conversation where you say, could you please turn down your music? Sure. And get them to actually do it, but also not create friction. And those are important things that are going to pervade the course of your life. So the residential, Harvard being a residential college where they put you in situations, is meant to do that, to teach you more, but also to create a supportive community. Harvard student body is over 6,000 students. They want to create a smaller place where you have a sense of belonging. And at Harvard, they actually attach faculty members, they attach graduate students and other mentors that help you through applying for jobs and fellowships, that help you understand graduate programs. I had a great advisor in the dorm that I lived in Lowell House who helped advise my process of applying to law school and wrote one of my recommendations on behalf of Harvard College. So it connects you to the community a lot as well, and it can really make a big place feel a lot smaller and feel like you have a home, and you get to know your classmates in various ways.
They also had like one of the best rowing teams at Harvard. They had a ballroom dance club. They had a theater group. They had an outdoor adventure group. Like, and there's more than you can grab.
A cappella theater, it's everywhere.
Harsh,
Second question.
Mike.
I have a problem actually that, when I'm running a business right now and I'm taking time out for GMAT, and that month that I'm taking out for GMAT is killing me at work. Like, I can't handle doing my GMAT and doing my work. I can't understand how people actually run a business, continue to run the business while in MBA. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's hard. I think it's hard to run a business while you're in an MBA program. And I think sometimes that's back to your question from earlier about which school, there are some schools that are more conducive to that than others. I think it's sometimes hard to run an existing business while you're in business school, but sometimes more successfully, people come up with a business idea, they create a business plan, and then they launch it during or immediately after school. And then you have Harvard professors on your board of advisors, and they're actually giving you honest feedback. And I think that's a little bit easier to manage, but I think the biggest challenge I had in business school was time management, because there's always more to do. The speakers that come, like the Jack Welches or the CEOs or the people that are on campus, you want to attend those talks, but at the same time, you want to be, working on your career, and whether that's applying for jobs or meeting employers, you want to be attending these conferences to learn. You need to be studying for your classes. There are also these social events. There might be a big, themed ball or party or something that you want to go to, and to find time to do it all is very difficult because it's a short, compressed time. I think it is difficult if you have an existing business to run it while you're in an MBA program, and so that might be something that you look at when selecting schools. There may be programs, and Vibha would know more.
Harsh, on the flip side, if you think about the resources you'll get at the school that are going to take that business from where it is right now, and if you have a long-term vision, a 15, 20-year vision of your business, then the resources you'd get at a place like Harvard would just be immense. From your classmates to the faculty to the advisors to the speakers who come, you could go on the Silicon Valley trek and discuss technology with them. Like, the access to people, like the access points are just phenomenal. Yeah. So think about it from a 20-year vision, not from like, oh, what's going to happen in my business next year,
I was going to say, and also you can, the one thing is that, first of all, at least like from what I understood, the value of your degree is the most when you're actually in school. Because that's when you're actually making all your contacts, when you're able to take the school thing and you're able to do all these treks and take that name to organize that trek, for instance, or to do that. And 15, 20 years down the line, there are only some programs in some schools where the value of the degree still remains, and that comes through the contacts and the situation that you've created for yourself within the school itself. So like being able to tap into everything that's there, especially since they've given you so many options in the beginning, seems overwhelming, but you literally trip and fall in algorithm speaking at the Kennedy School, so like you're tripping into like a whole range of resources that you're creating for yourself that you can then take with you as you go ahead. But the point is to create such a strong base so that 15 years down the line, when you're say for instance, like now, my older sister was class 2000, right, at HBS. But the thing is, saying class 2000 and saying I just graduated are two completely different things because you're in two different parts of your life. So taking that and then doing something with it and having created that really solid base comes from, I think that's what Vibha was trying to say, it comes from being able to, go to business school and make that decision to just focus on that. Because trying to do two things at the same time, especially when you're in a place where you're getting inundated with all this stuff, is going to be very difficult. I don't know.
No, I agree. I think that's a great point. I think if you have specific business challenges or business interests, like Vibha was saying, that you want to present to particular people, you can say, oh, I'm organizing this panel, but you get to choose who to invite. So you can invite the leaders that you think would have most influence. And then you have, first of all, you develop that contact with them so they know who you are and they're willing to answer your emails in the future. But you get to meet them when they arrive at their hotel and say, oh, you want to have time, let's get a drink and I'll talk to you about something I've been thinking about. I would love to hear your perspective on.
If you're looking for investors for your company, you could just organize a panel of tech investors. And then you say, I'll organize the panel. So you reach out to them, you say, oh, I'm Harsh Chen, I'm from HBS and I'm organizing this panel. Would you mind coming down to Boston? They'll come over and then you're the contact person. So you've now built this relationship with them, you follow up with them, and so it gives you a reason to reach out to them and they have a reason to now connect with you.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on mobile. And the thing is that they're talking a lot about what's going on in their schools as well, but you can actually step outside, like they're specifically speaking about undergrad, Kennedy School and business school, but you can actually step outside, or like law school, sorry, but you can actually step outside and you can cross-register to other classes, not just within the school, but within the Boston community. So say for instance you're interested in tech and there's that one class at MIT that is really interesting to you, you can actually cross-register into that class at MIT because they're right next to each other. Harvard and MIT are like.
Yeah, I don't think you can try.
But I'm just saying so like.
Oh, you have a question? So last question for the, yeah.
I'm just talking more so from the perspective of career changes. I want to know that when you're applying for a different career opportunity, and if you're not from the same industry as your career before business school, but if you want to get into one, how competitive does it get in terms of people who are already belonging to that industry?
Can you give me the example that you're thinking of? So like going from like an NGO to like consulting, is that the type of thing we're thinking?
Yeah. For example, if there are like tons of other people who are already from consulting background, they've spent years, say 10 years of experience in consulting background, they're fighting for the same, the opportunity that's there for an internship or for a job, then how much does the Harvard experience really help?
See, I think that business school or an MBA in general is a great opportunity for a career changer, right? It's one of those reasons that you go to business school is because you're doing something, but there's something else that you'd like to be doing. There's somewhere else you want to go. And the MBA allows you an opportunity to do that. You basically have to package yourself and sell yourself in your application to business school, but then also in your application to employers, where you make very clear to them what experiences you had before business school, how that's prepared you for what it is you want to go into, and then how that makes you more qualified than people who already came from it, and that you're going to be more driven. And it's all about using the experiences that you have and what you've done and what you bring to the table. And if you do that well, it's about selling yourself. That's one thing that
People use business school as a career switcher. It's a platform that allows you to come to business school and then say, okay, I worked as a consultant, I worked in an NGO, and I want to go out and work in like P&G or like a Johnson & Johnson. And the school will train you. You can take those courses. You can meet the interviewers when they come to campus, and then you build up your portfolio and your resume such that when they come to final round interviews, you have a summer in the middle. You can go intern at one of these firms. So people leverage their business school experience to then switch careers.
And I think that unless people are going back to the same firm, maybe they were sponsored by the firm, they're paying for them to go to business school, or they have some sort of outside arrangement for what preferential treatment you get if you go back to the same company. I don't think it's as common for someone to go from a Deloitte and then want to work at a Bain or a McKinsey or a BC. I don't think that's as common for MBAs. I think they're looking to career switch too, so maybe they came out of consulting and they're looking to go into marketing or consumer goods or something. So I think that the other thing I would encourage you to do if you are able to go to business school is to get to know some people who came out of the industry that you're going into. Your classmates are a great resource because they, number one, were in those careers and they know what it's like, but number two, they know the people who are doing the hiring and they can know what they're looking for. A lot of my classmates, when I was looking to do consulting, several of them had experience giving case interviews and giving the types of interviews that McKinsey gives, and so I practiced with my classmates. They sat across from me and I went through cases, and for the first few I stumbled. Much better stumble with someone who's supportive, who's going to give me critical feedback and help me improve, than to struggle when I sit down for the interview with the actual employer. So your classmates are a great resource. The ones that came out of those fields that you're now interested in will also be, your classmates are very supportive. They help each other out, and they're very willing to use their experiences and use their network that they know, their professional connections, to help you advance what you want to do. So I think that's another way to think about it.
I think we have to close because we have to close at 12:30. But you can talk to him right after. Thank you all for coming to the talk. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here. And Aaron, thank you so much for being here and having us. Aaron's also on our global advisory board, so if anyone ever needs to reach out to him, feel free to reach out to me and I'll reach out to him.